Week I was scheduled for my hip replacement surgery, my son called to tell me I needed to come over and help pack up their basement. Not to ask, to tell. I remember sitting at my kitchen table in Sudbury, holding the phone against my ear, trying to understand if I had heard him correctly. He knew about the surgery. I had told him 6 weeks earlier. I had even sent him the date in a text message, October 14th, the way you do when you want something to be real, something in writing that can't be misremembered later. Mom, we're moving storage units before winter and Leanne needs the help. The kids will be there too. You can see them at the same time. I said, sweetheart, I go in for surgery in 4 days. There was a pause. It's just a hip replacement. People do those all the time. I don't know why those words hit me as hard as they did. Maybe because I had been telling myself the same thing for months, trying to minimize it, trying not to be a burden about it. Hearing him say it back to me, like it was nothing, like I was being dramatic. Something in my chest went very still. I told him I couldn't do it. I told him the surgeon had given me a list of restrictions for the week before the procedure. No heavy lifting, no prolonged standing, minimal exertion. I wasn't supposed to be hauling boxes down a flight of stairs. I was 67 years old and I had been waiting 14 months on a waiting list for the surgery. 14 months of a cane. 14 months of waking up at 3 in the morning because I couldn't find a position that didn't hurt. He said, Leanne already arranged for the storage unit. We can't change the date. I want to be honest about something. My son is not a bad person. I have spent a lot of time in the months since trying to reconcile the man I raised with the man on that phone call, and I think the truth is somewhere in the middle of something I don't fully understand yet. He is 41 years old. He has 2 children under 5. He has a wife who runs their household like a project manager and expects everything to run on schedule. And somewhere along the way, I became a resource in that household rather than a person in it. I became the woman who picked up the grandchildren from daycare on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The woman who drove my daughter-in-law to her dental appointments because she hated driving in city traffic. The woman who sat with the children during their bout of RSV last winter, so the 2 of them could go to a work conference in Montreal. I had done all of it gladly. More than gladly. Those children are the best thing in my life. My grandson has my late husband's eyes, and it undoes me every time I look at him. But somewhere in the doing of all of it, I had stopped being a grandmother who helped out. I had become a standing arrangement. When I told my son I couldn't come that Saturday, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "We'll figure something out, I guess." Not warmly. The way you say it when you want someone to understand they've inconvenienced you. I lay awake that night thinking about the storage unit, about Leanne, who I had always tried hard with, who was efficient and organized and not particularly warm, but who I had told myself just had a different way of showing affection. I thought about the time she called me at 7 in the morning to ask if I could take the children for the whole weekend, because she and my son were going to a friend's cottage in Muskoka and hadn't arranged childcare. I had driven 40 minutes to their house in the September rain without a word of complaint. I thought about the $22,000. I hadn't planned to think about the $22,000 that night. I try not to. My husband. God, it's still strange to say my late husband, even after 3 years. My husband would have told me the money was given freely and it doesn't do any good to keep score. He was a better person than me in that way. But sometimes when I'm lying there in the dark, it comes up whether I want it to or not. The $22,000 was a down payment loan. 5 years ago, when my son and Leanne were buying their house in Barrie. They had been saving, but they were short. The market was moving fast and they were afraid of losing the house. I had money set aside, money my husband and I had saved over 30 years of careful living, money I had earmarked for our retirement, and I gave it to them because they needed it, and because I love them and because that's what you do. We drew up a simple repayment agreement, the kind that feels almost insulting to make with your own child, but that my husband insisted on. Bless him for it. They have repaid, as of this month, $4,000. I am not telling this story to be vindictive. I am telling it because I want you to understand what I was holding when I lay awake the night before I drove myself to my pre-surgical appointment alone, with a cane, in the early October dark. The surgery went ahead on October 14th, a Thursday. My son did not call that morning. My daughter-in-law did not call. I had arranged a ride through the hospital's volunteer transportation service, a retired school teacher named, I think, Barb, who was cheerful and kind and handed me a travel mug of weak Tim Hortons before I got in the car, and who waited in the surgical waiting area for 4 hours reading a Patricia Cornwell novel until I came out. I will never forget Barb. I have thought about her many times since, a stranger who sat in a plastic chair for 4 hours for me. The surgery itself went fine. My surgeon was matter-of-fact and competent, and when I came around in recovery, the first thing I felt was a profound and genuine relief that the long pain of the last year was going to be over. I cried a little, which I was embarrassed about, and one of the recovery nurses patted my hand and said, "Honey, everyone cries. It means you've been carrying something heavy for a long time." I thought that was a kind way to put it. I was in hospital for 2 nights. During those 2 nights, I received one text message from my son. It said, "Hope surgery went okay. Let us know when you're home." That was it. No call. No visit. Barry is 45 minutes from the hospital where I had my surgery. On a clear day, on the 400, it's nothing. My grandchildren did not come to see me. Leanne did not come. My son did not come. My neighbor Phyllis came both days. She brought me a container of homemade lentil soup on the second day and sat with me while I did my first physiotherapy exercises, cheering me on like I was running a marathon. Phyllis is 72 and has her own bad knee and has never once made me feel like my needs were an inconvenience. She just shows up. She has always just shown up. I came home on a Saturday. The hospital organized a discharge support worker to help me get settled, showed me how to use the walker properly, made sure I had the medications I needed. My son called that evening briefly. He asked if I needed groceries. I said I had enough for a few days. He said, "Good, good." And then he told me about the storage unit, how it had all worked out fine, how they'd found a bigger unit, how Leanne was happy with the organization of it. I listened. I said, "That's great, sweetheart." When I hung up, I sat for a long time in my living room with the walker in front of me and looked at the photographs on the mantel. My husband and I on our 35th anniversary trip to Cape Breton, both of us sunburned and laughing. My son at about 7 years old, missing both front teeth, holding up a fish he'd caught at the lake like it was the greatest achievement of his life. My granddaughter at 18 months, asleep on my chest, her whole perfect fist curled around my finger. I thought, when did I become invisible to him? The answer, when it came to me, was slow and not entirely comfortable. I had not become invisible. I had made myself convenient. Every time I had said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I had absorbed the cost, financial, physical, emotional, without asking for anything in return, I had been teaching him something. I had been teaching him that I had no edges, that I was always available, that my needs didn't need to be considered because I would always manage. I had taught him that, and I couldn't be entirely angry at him for learning it, but I could decide to stop the lesson. Recovery is a strange, slow thing. For the first week, I mostly slept and watched television and did my prescribed exercises, which were uncomfortable and tedious and necessary. Phyllis came over every other day. A woman from my church came twice with food. My daughter, I should say here, I have a daughter too, Wendy, who lives in Vancouver. Wendy called every single evening, sometimes twice. She cried on the phone when I told her what had happened. She said she was booking a flight. I told her not to, that I was managing, and she said, "Mom, you shouldn't have to just manage." She came anyway 2 weeks later, and we spent 5 days together. And she organized my physiotherapy schedule and restocked my kitchen and sat with me in the evenings, and we talked like we hadn't talked in years. My son came to visit for the first time 3 weeks after my surgery. He brought the grandchildren, which I was grateful for. My grandson sat beside me very carefully on the couch and told me in great detail about a dinosaur he had been learning about, and my granddaughter fell asleep in my arms the way she does, boneless and trusting. And those 40 minutes were the best 40 minutes I'd had in a long time. When the children went to explore the backyard with Leanne, my son and I sat at the kitchen table and he made tea, which he knows how to do because I taught him, and there was a silence between us that felt different from other silences. He said, "I should have called more." I know. I looked at him for a moment. He looked tired. He looked actually a lot like his father. The same line between the eyebrows, the same way of holding his shoulders when he said something he knows wasn't enough. I said, I went to the hospital alone, and I came home alone. He didn't say anything. I said, I'm not telling you that to make you feel terrible. I'm telling you because I need you to understand that I am a person who can be alone and frightened, the same as anyone. I am not a service your family uses. He looked at the table. He said, I know, Mom. I need that to mean something different than it has, I said, going forward. I don't know what the future looks like from here. I am not naive enough to believe one conversation changes everything. But something shifted in the room that afternoon, some small tectonic thing, and I felt it. He felt it too, I think. What I know is this. I came home from the hospital alone, and I survived it. I recovered mostly by myself with the help of a neighbor who owed me nothing and a daughter who crossed a continent because she wanted to. I did my exercises every day, even when they hurt. I graduated from the walker to a cane, and then last Tuesday I walked to the end of my street and back without the cane. In the November cold, the leaves all down, the sky that particular shade of gray that feels like a held breath. It hurt a little, not the hip. That was fine. But the other kind of hurt, the kind that lives in the chest and doesn't show on any imaging, that was there. It probably will be for a while. But I walked the whole length of the street, and I stood at the end of it, and I looked back at my house with the lights on in the kitchen window, and I thought, that house is mine. That life is mine. My health is mine. My health is mine. And from now on, I intend to treat it that way. When I got back inside, I sat down at the kitchen table and I opened my laptop, and I sent an email to my financial advisor about updating my estate documents. Not out of spite, out of clarity, because I had spent 3 weeks alone with myself, which is a long time to spend with yourself, and I had come out the other side knowing exactly what mattered and what didn't. Afterwards, I made myself a cup of tea, the good kind, the loose-leaf Earl Grey my daughter had brought from Vancouver, and I sat in the quiet of my kitchen in Sudbury, and I was, in a way I hadn't been in a very long time, entirely at peace. I've been thinking since all of this about the difference between love and availability, because I confused them for a long time. I thought showing up every Tuesday, every Thursday, every rainy Saturday someone needed me was how you demonstrated love, and it is partly, but I showed up so consistently, so without complaint, that I stopped being a person and became a given. And that's not love anymore, on either side. That's just a system running. What happened with my son didn't come from nowhere. I can see that now, more clearly than I could in October when I was sitting in a hospital bed with my phone quiet on the nightstand. He learned from me. I taught him, over many years and many yeses, that my needs were flexible and his weren't. Every time I absorbed something without naming it, the $22,000, the weekend drives, the long Tuesdays, I was telling him a story about who I was, and he believed it. Why wouldn't he? I told it so convincingly. There's something uncomfortable in that. It would be easier to make him simply the villain of this story. And some days, I'll be honest, that's what I want. But the more honest version is that we built this together, him and me, over a long time. And changing it required me to be honest in a way I hadn't been. Not cruel, not dramatic, just clear. I am a person who can be alone and frightened. I hadn't said that to him before. Maybe I hadn't said it to myself. Phyllis, who is 72 with a bad knee of her own, showed up for me in ways my own son didn't. And I've thought about why that is. I think it's because Phyllis sees me. She doesn't see a resource or an arrangement. She sees a woman named, well, me. A whole person. That's what we owe each other, isn't it? Not just presence, but the decency to look at someone and understand they have a full interior life, fears and limits and things that hurt. What I know now is that integrity, real integrity, not the kind you perform for other people, but the kind you hold privately, in the dark, requires you to be honest about your own worth. It took me 67 years and a hospital volunteer named Barb and the sound of my own walker on a November sidewalk to really understand that. My value was never contingent on my usefulness. I had just been acting like it was. And the walk to the end of my street, the one without the cane, in the gray November cold, that was something I did for myself. Nobody saw it. Nobody cheered. It was just me and the bare trees and the knowledge that I had come through something, not just the surgery, but the longer, quieter thing underneath it, and I was still standing. That's enough. That has always been enough. I just needed to remember it.